I just wanted to share some thoughts about the Paraguay property market. It's a hunch that I have about some things that I've been noticing in recent months. I'm careful to describe it as a hunch because when you're talking about Paraguay, you have to always be cautious because there is not the same availability of reliable data sets and accurate information in respect to things like property prices across the board that you may find in many other parts of the world. But I do believe that there's something in what I think I've been noticing. And that is that I think at the top end of the property market here in Paraguay, you're seeing a real shift, a real cooling off in respect to both the prices being paid and the frequency of properties being sold here. And when you consider what's going on in many other parts of the world, well, that would make sense because property prices in many countries are in a state of decline. So if people are being hit in other parts of the world, you would expect that it would also align with what's going on here, particularly when you consider that that top end of the Paraguay property market is heavily populated by foreigners. But here's an interesting thought exercise. If that is the case, how is the rest of the property market here in Paraguay situated, particularly in what you might call the middle class, the mid-tier, where people are buying prices at the point where maybe most Paraguayans would buy, certainly the price point where we purchased our property. How will that fare if we keep going down this track? Well, I'm relatively optimistic, and I'll give you a few reasons why. When you look at places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, a lot of the pressures in respect to the real estate market are brought to bear by virtue of the debt culture that those markets work in. People are heavily indebted in the property market. So when someone at the IMF sneezes, many people get a cold. And if the interest rates go up and inflation increases and whatever else comes to bear, you can very quickly see a flow-on effect where prices across the board, right throughout the property market, from what you consider to be the low tier to the high tier, are impacted, and you see properties being sold off at considerably less than what they were purchased. You don't have that sort of debt-driven market here in Paraguay. I can't tell you what the percentage of people it is that are holding mortgages here, but I can say that it's nowhere near the same sort of debt-driven frenzy that you see in Australia and New Zealand, where so many people are choking on their mortgage, and that's just the way that market is geared. Here, properties are often held for generations. You don't see that same sort of tendency for people to hit the age of 20, get a job, and then get racked with a 30-year mortgage. Yeah, they'll borrow some money and buy maybe a vacant bit of land, but they won't go in up to their necks in debt generally and find themselves out of their depth when someone sneezes at the World Bank. So I think that the market here is generally better insulated in respect to home ownership as it relates to the ability to hold on to properties anyway. The other thing that you don't see here anywhere near like what you see in many other countries is you don't have the governments, both federal and local, that are placing further burdens on homeowners in respect to the many and varied ridiculous ways that they do in places like Australia and Canada, New Zealand and so forth. I've been keeping my ears to the ground about what's going on in those places, and the way that the governments are thinking up new and inventive ways to relieve people of their money, well, it's just mind-blowing. At a time when things are already getting tough for people, they're thinking up all sorts of inventive ways, not only in just living, but also in respect to owning their property. Land taxes, water rates, environmental fees, and all sorts of just ludicrous add-ons that the average Joe is having to endure and try and juggle, along with the issues relating to servicing their debt, holding on to their jobs and trying to stay relevant in an AI paradise, and all those things kind of impact when it comes to people trying to hold on to their properties. So I think that sort of translates to what I'm seeing here in Paraguay. That is that there's a certain sector that is being impacted, but at that mid-range, the sort of price point that I bought my property for, many Paraguayans would do likewise, you're not seeing the same sort of movement. And what I think will happen if things continue to get tough and people are more inclined not to buy properties across the board, well, Paraguayans will generally just hold on to their properties. They don't have to sell because they're choking because of that crazy mortgage or because the government has invented a new and wonderful way to tax them because they own that property. No, you can just park that bit of land and just forget about it until times get okay again and off you go. So for those reasons, I think that the real property market in Paraguay is relatively, well, at least better insulated than places where people are choking just to, pay the gas bill and put petrol in their car. Because it's usually those sort of environments where you see crazy fluctuations in the property market and people having to sell their house wholesale and the way it goes. The other factor or trend that I've been seeing that further reinforces my feeling that maybe things are really cooling off at that high end is a lot of people have moved to Paraguay since we've been here, and there's been a number of high profile people who have come and become involved at the high end of the property market and claim that Paraguay was the best place in the world, and 5 minutes later, they've hopped on a plane, they've gone to the next shiny place because Paraguay wasn't all that they claimed it would be or could be, and now they're off somewhere else swanning around and trying to make their money as they do. But I think that's another sort of trend that probably reinforces my hunch that the property markets right throughout Paraguay, definitely in Asuncion, have somewhat cooled. And I really don't think it's a particularly bad thing. Yeah, it's sad for people who have bought at the top end and thought that that party would always be going, but that's the way things roll. But people who have invested in a more rational part of the market, I think Paraguay will do what Paraguay does. It'll keep rolling on. It's a cash economy. It really doesn't feel like things are as crazy as what they sound in many other parts of the world. I can only go by what I'm hearing, what people are telling me in other parts, but I'm very happy to be here, let me tell you that. And, I just think that these things just need to be thought through, particularly if you're thinking about coming here and investing at that higher end. Well, you do your own assessments and, I wish you luck in whatever you decide. So there it is. That's just what I'm sensing. I don't suggest that Paraguay is a utopia. Everyone should flock here because the property market is bulletproof or any other silly notion. Paraguay is not for everyone. You have to be very careful. And one of the things that I've always suggested that people should consider is don't come here and spend crazy prices for property, because when the music stops, well, you don't want to be found out of your chair. But if you hold on to a bit of property that you have purchased for a reasonable price in a place like Paraguay, I think there's fair reason to expect that you may be in a place that might be better insulated than some others. So until next time, take care. Ciao.
Smoking